All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the Institute of Nonprofit Event Training seminar. Today, we're going to talk about events in relation to COVID-19 and the way that that's impacted development as a whole, specifically development events here in the year 2020, which seems like a very, very crazy time to be alive. As more people are starting to check in and get started, I'm going to give a few more minutes for people to join us. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and kind of explain how this works. If you're like me, you're new to webinars, but I'm sure in about a week or two, we're all going to be pros at these webinars as well as conference calls as we continue to practice them and do them in our meetings and our daily work, which is obviously changed significantly for so many. There's ways to engage. We have a chat box you should see. Please feel free to ask questions throughout. I may not respond to them right away, but I will answer them at some point. I'm hoping that this webinar will go no longer than an hour. And after the hour is done, I will stick around as long as needed to answer any questions that people have. Also, feel free to shoot me an email. We can talk offline. We can talk via email or on the phone. My email address is mark, M-A-R-K, @instituteofnet.com. So please feel free to reach out there. And also know that throughout the webinar, we've got this great tool where we will be able to send polls and questions for people to respond and to be able to get a good feel of where you guys are at on this webinar specifically, hoping that this information is most relevant for where your organization is at and what you're hoping to get from it. And then along those lines too, we're going to send a survey out afterwards that we really hope you'll take at least no more than 30 seconds to respond to that. So we will be better prepared as we continue to do these webinars in the weeks and months ahead as we continue this social distancing. So to begin, let me start out with a poll, and I'll give you about 60 seconds to fill this out. You should see the poll pop up here right now. And the question is, did you cancel a spring event due to COVID-19? So I'd love to get your input here. I'll wait a second as those answers come in, and then we'll get going. All right. Well, thanks so much for those responding. Looks like 90% so far have said yes, they had to cancel an event, unfortunately. I'm sure that's probably a pretty fair representation of organizations nationwide. It seems like a significant of organizations have been impacted by this. We've got over 40 attendees signed up for today. So as you look at those polls, you can keep those numbers in mind. It's out of a sample size of about 40. So thanks so much for participating in that. We'll continue to do those throughout the call. So let me give you a brief intro of myself, intro of iNet. We'll talk about what this webinar is going to be about. And then we'll really dive into some overview thoughts and analysis that I have and how events in 2020, development events particularly, are going to be impacted by COVID-19. And then I'm going to give some ways to overcome it. We'll go ahead and get started. So I'm the executive director of the Institute of Nonprofit Event Training, or we refer to it as the Institute of Net. I've been consulting with nonprofits for over 8 years and mainly focus on small and new nonprofits with an annual budget of $1 million or less. Hold on one second. I'm seeing some people chat about some issues with their audio. Obviously, we want to get those fixed before we go too far. I see Josh and Kimberly are having issues. Is anyone else having these issues? Okay, perfect. It seems like it may be more on an individual connection versus on my connection. So I'm going to keep going. If there's issues, please continue to respond. We'll try to get those fixed. So the Institute of Net, we started in January 2019. We started this particularly to fill a needed gap within the nonprofit space that I saw. I found that so many passionate and talented people start nonprofits because they care about the mission, and not necessarily because they have the expertise it takes to run the business side of a nonprofit. When I think of nonprofits, I think of the missional side and then the administrative business side that so many of us do not enjoy, but yet get stuck having to figure out to be able to make the missional side more effective. And I saw that a lot of people started not because they're saying, well, I'm really good at fundraising or I'm really good at running a nonprofit, but rather they saw the need and they created a nonprofit to be able to help solve the solution that they exist to, or the problem that their solution as an organization exists to serve. And so these areas I've found nonprofit leaders struggled in were things like board management, some strategic planning, development, fundraising, and events. So one thing I saw the cycle where nonprofits needed people with expertise to help teach them how to do things so they can raise more money, be more effective, so they can be more impactful. However, since they didn't have the expertise, they didn't have the money. Since they didn't have the money, they weren't able to hire those with the expertise. So it was kind of like this endless cycle where they were really stuck just trying to have to figure out themselves how to be able to progress and grow as an organization. So ultimately they can be more impactful. And so seeing the cycle, I came up with the solution to stop this. And that's who we are and what we do at the Institute of Net. We're a nonprofit, so we work to raise funds to support the nonprofits we exist to serve and bring the money from our donors so we can give the expertise and not just take the money on the other side. There's nothing wrong with that. And we understand people need to feed themselves. But the reality is nonprofits weren't able to afford the services they needed. So with this, we believe our communities need our nonprofits. We think they're so essential. If every nonprofit in our communities packed up and left overnight, it would be a dramatic impact that would be felt across everyone within our community, not just those that we directly serve, but also those indirectly. We need our nonprofits. So we believe our communities need our nonprofits, as I said, and we want to help these nonprofits thrive. We don't just want them to say, okay, let's do the bare minimum or let's survive, but we want them to be as successful as they're willing and able to be able to grow, so they can have as large of an impact as possible. So why events? We believe events are the most important fundraising tool. They take a significant amount of time, and there are very little resources out there that are helping nonprofits with events. In fact, we have not found any purely dedicated organizations to just the event side like ours is. There's other fantastic organizations out there that do nonprofit consulting. We're friends with a lot of them. We support what they do, but we have found that events is rather just a portion of what they do versus the primary purpose of what they do, which I think is great. It's needed. But with that, it also shows that there's need for an organization just focused on events. And why is that? It's because they take a significant amount of time. Since events are the most significant fundraising tool, they're worth the time. But if you're not being able to invest the time needed, because one, you just either don't have the time or you don't have the money to hire people, then they're hard to figure out. And so we wanted to be able to provide both a service that can help with the manpower side and then also a service that can help with the educational and training side. Because if you don't have experience in events, it can also be quite daunting to try to figure out and to plan. So we think events are the tip of the iceberg in regards to the knowledge a nonprofit leader will need to run a healthy organization. If you leave working with us and are an expert event planner and know development within events, that's great. And that's going to help you. It's going to help you significantly. And that's why we exist. But that's not where you should stop. That's just the beginning of it. So just like an iceberg below the surface, there's going to be so much more that's worth investing and learning to be able to figure that out. Now, our hope is by working with us and by doing events well, now you'll have some cash flow, and now you'll have some money to invest in some of these other services that you may not be able to get for free or be able to get for significantly reduced, but are still needed. I know for me, one of my biggest weaknesses is accounting. So just being able to have those resources to bring in an outside third-party accountant to help you is going to be so needed. So at the Institute of Net, we do 3 things specifically, and I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my slideshow here. I'm getting used to this webinar thing as well, so I forgot to get that started. But let me talk about what we do at the Institute of Net and how we support the nonprofits that we talked about. The first we offer is free classes. So pre-COVID-19, we did free monthly classes for nonprofit leaders, volunteers, anyone in the community that was interested in joining us. We offer those both in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Nashville, Tennessee. We just started there this year and have had a great response with nonprofits in that incredible city. And so during this COVID-19, we've pivoted and we switched to this webinar format. So we're going to continue to offer these free classes and webinars, not just about the current context and situation that we're going through, but also some more general overall event planning information that's going to be helpful for you now and years down the road. So continue to look for those. We'll email you those, and we'd love for you to continue to join us. The consulting, we hope the classes are beneficial. We know they will be, but we also know there's no such thing as a one size fits all, especially in the nonprofit space. Look, so many different sizes, and we want to be able to help serve as much as we can and give as specific and tailored advice and information to these nonprofits to be able to better their mission. And so we found that the consulting is a great service to be able to offer to that. It could be something such as we're looking to start an event and we need your help and just advising us on what type of event to do. We've worked with some nonprofits where they had done an event for 20 years and they said, now's the time, we just need fresh eyes and perspective on it. And we came in and were able to advise on that side as well. And then the final thing we offer is the event planning service itself. So as I mentioned before, it's our hope is to bless the clients we serve in 2 ways, both with the knowledge and expertise, but also with the manpower. Events take a ton of time, a ton of resources, and we want to be able to come in and combat that by offering and bringing our own resources, bringing our own time that we get funded elsewhere, but also be able to help teach and train these nonprofits we work with to think through these events in a more effective way. Our vision and hope with working with nonprofits is that we can come in and work with the nonprofit for probably about 2 years with an event and then be able to leave and let them be able to do it on their own, either by training a volunteer or a person on staff to handle those events, and that they feel confident with the process and how to do it, as well as, of course, the skill and how to do it. So this is something we would love to help you with. One kind of side note that I'd like to mention as well is, as I mentioned, we are a nonprofit. We work to raise funds to support the work that we do, but we also work to actually do event planning for what we call for-profit clients. So these can be either for-profit businesses or really, really large nonprofits that can afford the fair market value for our event planning service. And we still like to plan events for these organizations and then take 100% of the revenue from those services and we put that into the scholarship fund, which helps offset the cost for us to serve who is ultimately our mission, which is the small and the new nonprofits. So keep that in the back of your mind too. We love to be able to share the word on that. The more for-profit events we have, the more nonprofit events that we can work with. And so we would love for your help and maybe sharing that around with anyone that you know on your board or your donors if they're interested in an event planner to keep us in mind. So enough about us. Hopefully that gives you some context. Let's talk now about specifically this webinar. What is that we're hoping to do? Well, in this day and age, everything is about COVID-19 these last few weeks. I mean, I can't see an article or a webinar that's not contextualizing their expertise around the situation. And we thought that is so needed for as well. I saw over 90% of the people on this call had to cancel their nonprofits or nonprofit events. And so we thought this would be a great time to be able to give our advice on the way that we're approaching it. We had to cancel some events as well. And then also some ideas over the last couple of weeks that we've been brainstorming to say, how can we still achieve our objectives even without an event? And we'll dive more into that. So during this webinar, please feel free to use the chat to ask questions. I'll get to them throughout the session. I plan to take around an hour, as I mentioned before, and stick around as late as you'd like to ask questions, and hopefully we can help out. And then finally, I'm a strong believer in knowing the why behind something when we do it. I don't like just teaching how to do things, but rather how to approach to solve the problem of it. So this webinar is not just saying, hey, your event was canceled, now this is what you should do. We're going to help you think through how do we process this, and then how do we analyze it to be able to come up with a solution. And then at the end, of course, we'll give you some actual ideas and some solutions as well. So for this webinar, we're going to discuss the current state of events, how you should proceed in light of that, and then some ideas we've been sharing that can help you get creative in light of missing your spring or fall event. Very final housekeeping thing I'll mention is that we're going to select someone who will win 3 hours of free consulting, which is a $300 value at full value for one of the attendees at the end of this webinar. And then we're also going to offer and put everyone who's joined this webinar, as well as any other webinar between now and May 15th, an opportunity to win a free event planning service. So we'll come in and plan an entire event for you completely for free. This is valued at a $15,000 service at our full charge. And so we think this is a great opportunity and hopefully incentive to continue to drive people to know more about kind of what we're thinking about during this COVID-19 time, during our development planning trainings. Every time you join a webinar, you'll be entered again to win this. So the more times you join us, the more chances you'll have at winning that $15,000 event planning service. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So what does events in 2020 look like? One thing I would say as a disclaimer is I understand my opinion is just my opinion here. So we are in a time of no data and a lot of guessing. What is life going to look like a week from now, most likely come the summer, this fall? We have so much uncertainty. So, take this with a grain of salt. You may disagree with me, and that is totally okay. This is the way that I'm approaching things. And so hopefully this can help you as you think through it. I'm going to talk first about some things that we do know in this time of guessing. There's discussion and debate on balancing the need to shut down the entire country for the sake of spreading the virus, as well as the need to be open to keep people working and be able to make their basic needs. It's a very valid conversation. It's a tough conversation. And like most things today, there seems to be a great divide and varying opinions. I don't envy those in power who must make these decisions, but I believe there's some clear things that we do know that we can at least use those to evaluate as we move forward. One thing we know is those over 60 are at higher risk. We know that the best case scenario for a vaccine, based on all my research, will probably be winter or 2021 at best. It's amazing how much they've been able to fast track this, but nonetheless, it seems like spring 2021 is what I've been hearing. Again, this could change, but I feel pretty confident and based on my research on that. And we also know we must flatten the curve. We know that, hospitals don't have the capacity for the current need. And so we must be able to help them catch up as much as possible by eliminating the spread as much as we can. So with this info, my conclusion is that I doubt that we're going to have events over 50 people for the rest of the year. Now, don't freak out on this. Again, this could be just my thought. In fact, I'm going to offer a poll, and I would love to get your thoughts on this. It's going to be, do you think we will have any more events over 50 people in 2020? So I'd love to see what the group thinks. The reason I think this is I believe the country will reopen in stages. So instead of an all-at-once approach in large gatherings will be the last thing to be allowed. For example, events like pro sporting events may still happen, but without fans. Essential groups like churches, funerals, etc., may still happen, but in a modified way. But with that, unessential gatherings such as fundraisers or social events will be more scrutinized. And so I think as we think of fundraising events, as much as I would love to have them, and again, I could be wrong on this, I really think that they're going to be one of the last things that we're going to kind of release back into society as we start to open up our country. Gatherings, again, need to happen. Churches need to happen, funerals. So it's not events overall. And I see Rachel saying that she is hopeful, and I totally agree. I'm hopeful too. We have a lot of events, and this is really going to cut into our budget at Institute of Net as an event planning organization if we have to cancel these. But at the same time, I want to be somewhat realistic. And I think until we have the vaccine, it's going to be tough to be able to have large gatherings come together without an essential reason to really do it. So again, know what I'm saying this, it doesn't mean our current state that we have with no events. I think, again, churches and things like that will probably still be meeting and as they probably should. But unessential large gatherings, that's where we may be more willing to avoid and gather those. So with so many unknowns, it seems like a guess, but doctors seem hopeful that with the warmer weather will give us a break and help with the COVID-19. And then this fall, as temperatures drop again, I've heard there's some theories that we'll go back to a modified version of social distancing. So I believe this could be less strict. Again, we're going to have months to prepare for it this time, unlike before. So hopefully our hospitals are better prepared. But nonetheless, those with underlying health conditions, the elderly, the threat still remains for them, even with the respirators, even with the hospitals available. So, keep that in mind, because I think that can impact, our demographic that we're going to look at as far as who attends our events, when they attend it. I know, for example, my grandmother has a very serious heart issue. And so if she contracts the virus with that, she has a very, very high fatality rate. So for her, she's probably going to approach things this fall differently than I will, at least until there's a vaccine. So the question is, does this mean we should cancel summer and fall events? I don't think so. The way that I'm approaching it right now is all summer and fall events are still happening, and I hope they do. With that being said, though, I'm also approaching it that summer and fall events aren't happening. And that's kind of the core of this webinar, and the reason I went down this COVID-19, where I'm definitely not an expert. And again, I could be wrong on this, but I wanted you to understand my train of thought and how I came across this. So as I start to give my suggestions and feedback, you'll understand my perspective and where I'm coming from. So with that, though, let's say I'm wrong and events are taking place and starting late summer or fall. What are some other things to consider? One thing I am very confident on is that if we do have events this summer and fall, they're not going to look the same as they would have if we didn't have the coronavirus, if we didn't have COVID-19 come and impact our daily lives. And so the three things I'm going to look at is, the first is the economic impact. Obviously a lot of companies and businesses are hurting really bad right now. How is this going to impact your sponsors? A lot of our events have repeat sponsors and have people that come year after year that are a key part in making the event happen. So if that's the case, how is this going to impact their industry? Now, the interesting about this is that there's actually a lot of industries thriving right now. They're not shutting down. I've got our yard guys here right now that they're considered essential as long as they stay social distancing and that they can continue to work in this time. And so my guess is they're probably going to have even more work right now because so many people are investing in that right now as spring is happening and we're staying home and working on home projects. So they're going to do well. A hotel, for example, they're greatly taking a hit. So if you have a big hotel sponsor for an event of yours, the odds are they're probably not going to be able to sponsor again. So be able to look at it from an industry standpoint. My assumption is that your event only has maybe 15 to 25 sponsors. So the reality is, it's not like we're talking a general, nationwide assessment, but really look at your pool and look at the people that are your sponsors, traditionally your relationships. And then, ask yourself, how is the coronavirus impacting their companies and impacting their industries right now? And do you think they're going to have the cash flow to be able to sponsor? Something else to think of is that a lot of us receive gifts from donor advised funds. I know National Christian Foundation is a great example of one that does great work during this time. And so the reality is the people that have already from years past been investing into their National Christian Foundation, even if their company is going through a tough time and cash flow is tough, they still have those funds sitting in their donor advised funds, and they can still be able to leverage and give those out. So keep that in mind as well, that if you look back and say, Joe Schmo over here continues to sponsor the event and he's doing it through his donor advised fund, even though his company is having a tough time, as you're starting to do this analysis, just think, well, he may have $50,000 in his donor advised fund right now still, that obviously he's willing to give away and designate, because it's already been technically given in the eyes of the IRS and designated. So it's not like you can just liquidate that out and put that back into his wallet or his company. That's still going to a charity. So keep that in mind. The second point is the demographic. So again, if your demographic is mainly a 65 and up crowd, my guess is they're going to, even if the country is, completely open again and I'm wrong and events are happening and we're not really taking those precautions, maybe social distancing in a modified ways is still happening. And I know there's conversations around, should people just go out in public but wear a mask? Maybe things like that are happening. But the question is will your demographic, depending on who they are, be willing on their own and take their own decision to be able to go out and be in large gatherings again? I'm not saying, again, they're not willing to go to anything, but my guess is they may weigh large gatherings, fundraising events in a way that they probably haven't before, as far as a net positive or a net negative interaction for them. And so think about that. Think about who your people are. Are they more at risk? Is it a 30 to 50 crowd, or is it, a 60 to 75 crowd? And consider that. The final would be, and this one, I don't want to go into it too much, but optics, I think, is important for you as an organization. So, just consider, what is the state of society at that point? Maybe, we've given freedom back to individuals and organizations to make the decision themselves. But at the same time, what is the social consideration with your event? And honestly, for some organizations, they can approach the same question and come to different conclusions because of who they are and who their demographic is. So just consider the optics. I don't like putting too much weight in the optics, but I do think it matters to a degree. So what does that look like for your organization? And if you try to have a large event before, maybe the community as a whole is really excited about you doing it, ask yourself, what does that look like? I know we've got people on this webinar from Nashville to Raleigh, North Carolina, to Greensboro, Wilmington, so all over. So the reality is different communities are dealing with this at different rates and different threats. Rochester, New York is dealing with it a lot different than maybe someone out in Montana that doesn't even have a case. So consider, what does it look like for your community, the optics around that, even if from a legal and a government standpoint, you can have an event again. Okay, so those are things that I am considering and processing as I'm looking at my events in 2020. Again, I'm planning these events as if they're happening, but with that, I'm going to have some modifications to just normally planning the event. So I'm going to talk about those. So we keep this in mind. So how should we proceed? How should we continue forward with our fundraising events while social distancing, but also protect our organization and figure out the development of our organization moving forward? Well, first, I'll reiterate that is still start the planning process for your fall events. Now is more important than ever. I'm a firm believer with any events, you can't start too soon. However, I think even more so now, because the reality is everyone who's canceled, the 90% on this call, as well as, our society as a whole that canceled their spring events, most of them are looking to reschedule those in the summer or the fall. and then also in 2021. And because of that, there is a giant race right now for being able to schedule dates. So we need to start planning with all fronts, with vendors and venues and everything else, so that we can be ahead of the curve and go ahead and lock in and have as many options as we can in planning these events. We'll talk more about that later. All right. And then the final thing with that too, I was just looking at my notes, is that also I have found so far, and this could change, is that it seems like there's better negotiating power right now for fall events and for 2021, because so many venues and vendors have just had their entire book of events for a few months canceled, that they're desperate to get more things on the books. Now you wait a month, you wait a few months, and demand picks up, and there's a lot more competition for those dates. You may not have as much bargaining power, but right now I've found that it seems like venues are more willing to negotiate. And I've talked to some other experts in the event space that have affirmed that thought, because again, they're desperate. Hotels and everything else are desperate to be able to get groups booked. The second is to understand your donors and where they currently are. This one's tough, but can be valuable if done right. We're not perfect at predictions and being able to figure out things, but we need to try, and we need to be able to look at as much as we can. Too often we don't take time to assess and jump right into action. We need to raise money. This raises money. Let's do it. Well, yeah, sort of, but we need to ask ourselves a lot more questions before we land on making that conclusion. It's amazing the amount of webinars and articles, as I mentioned before, that are offering the subject matter expertise with COVID-19. But how many of them actually stop to think, what do my clients or my demographics really want at this time? So not just what are things that I want to give them, but what are they actually asking for? And I think that's a very different question, that sometimes it can have the same answer, and sometimes maybe not. But I think we need to ask the question. I think we're so used to just throwing things together that we think would be helpful that we forget to really assess, is this going to be valuable? So some questions to ask is, what are your donors going through right now, and how will your communication be received by them? If a lot of your donors are in a specific industry that are greatly struggling and just lost their jobs, and you just keep asking them for money, that's not going to be received as well. So as we as nonprofits continue to ask for things and we need things, let's not forget about the other side of it as well. And how can we love and support our donors, our volunteers, those that support us in the times that are good, and be able to give back to them right now. So let's consider them. Let's ask, how are they doing? Let's try to assess where they're at. Again, they may be in an industry that's thriving right now. And so, the way that you approach that is going to be very different than someone that's not. So another way to think about it is that we care so much about the causes our organizations focus to support. Sometimes we tend to forget that the majority of the people, the majority of people don't care about our cause as much as we do. And that's tough to hear sometimes. I struggle with this a lot. I care so much about helping nonprofit leaders because I know how valuable nonprofits are, that when other people don't necessarily get that vision and don't come along with me, it can be confusing, and it gets discouraging with me. But sometimes I have to realize, there's so many amazing causes out there that their cause, they may care significantly about education, and they just put all their time and their emotional ability and their resources into that. That it's not that they don't agree that the cause that I have is needed, but the reality is they don't care about this cause as much. And so I think, again, we need to have a healthy dose of reality and understanding when we approach our donors. What are they going through, and what do they care about right now? Because as much as we care about the things we support, and as needed as they are, for other people, they may not be as high on the priority list. And with that being in mind, the way that we approach them will probably be different if it's a very low priority for them versus, if it's their top priority. So an example would be like, you want to have an online event. Great. Question is do your donors really want to have that? My guess is, a lot of times they probably don't. That may not be true for everyone. Again, each situation is their own. We can look into doing online events. We can look into doing them effectively. And I'm going to talk about some ideas in doing so. However, again, just because you think you want to do it and you've got to figure something out, and this is a creative way, don't forget to also ask the question, what do my donors want? What do my volunteers want? And how can I serve them, as well as communicating the needs that we have? All right. So the third way to be able to proceed with events and development here in the midst of COVID-19 is that now you've done proper analysis, is to rework your development plan. And if you haven't yet, make sure you create one. For those that have attended my classes, you know how important a development strategy is to a successful event. Anyone can plan a fun event. I'm convinced of it. However, an effective event that achieves your goals is really where the talent comes in. That's really where the training and the experience is elevated. Events are not a development strategy. More times than not, when I work with nonprofits, I ask if they have a development strategy, and the answer is either no or it is yes. And then I look at it, and it consists of a spring event and a fall event. It seems more times than not that's the case. So remember what I said earlier on, events are an important tool in a development strategy. They're not a strategy. So that is so key. They are a tool and a strategy. They're not a strategy. An analogy, I love to think in analogies. An analogy I think of with this is, think of building a house. You must have a plan to do it right. And then you use a saw to cut the wood to the size you need it, because that's so crucial in being able to build a house. Can you imagine building a house, though, without a saw? Or can you imagine even building a house without a plan? I would argue it wouldn't even work. But if it did, it would take significantly longer if you didn't have the saw. If you didn't have the plan, I don't think you could build a house at all just by winging it. But yet that's what we do as nonprofits, isn't it? It's too often we kind of just push forward with things because we don't have much time, and we really don't take the hours that's needed to have the meetings and to really create the plan. We just try to wing it from week to week and month to month. Well, that worked before. Let's do that again. Or we got to figure this out in the next few months. What are we going to do? Rather, let's sit down and create a plan for the entire year and figure out how is that going to impact and achieve our objectives and our goals here for 2020 and what we're trying to do. So as we build healthy nonprofits, we need both a solid plan and the key tools to execute that plan. So events are the most trusted tool in building development, but they are pointless without a larger development plan that they are supporting. So events are the saw in this analogy. It's great if you have a plan. Again, that's step one. But now you got the plan and you don't have the tools to execute the plan. It's going to be really, really, really difficult, if even possible, to execute that plan. So when you think of events, let's have that shift to think more of events as a tool, a very powerful and impactful tool. They're not a fundraising strategy. So I could go on and on about the development plan, but I'll just leave it with the fact that you need a plan, and you need one that's reflective now of COVID-19. Because I can assure you that your plan 2 months ago probably is not going to work nearly as well as it will now, having a new plan in this new crazy world that we have found ourselves in. COVID-19 is impacting our events the entire year. Again, even if we have events this summer and fall, and I'm wrong on that, the reality is, like I mentioned, between the economic, the demographic standpoint, we're still going to have an impact on these events. And so we can't go into it just hoping and expecting that events that we did last year are going to work as well as this year. There may be ways for those events to work better, but they take adaptation and creativity in this new day and age that we live in. We can't just repeat the same process. So the final thing with the development plan is, we can help you with it. That's something that we've done historically, and we believe so firmly in it. We won't plan an event, a full development event with a nonprofit until they have a development plan, because there's so much that happens before and after an event throughout the year that actually makes that event successful if we do it right. Our friends at Mission Triangle, for those of you in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, are great at this as well. I can give you their information. And there's also, for those of you around the country, some other consultants and networks that we've partnered with both in the Nashville area and other places that I think are going to be great to be able to help you as you create your development plan. So please feel free to reach out with us. If we can't help you, we want to pass you along to these other great resources that we've connected with. So the final thing as we proceed with events and development here in the midst of COVID-19 is we got to stay on top of it. With things being canceled, being home all the time, having the family at home, it is so easy to do just what needs to be done and then to stop. And you know what? Sometimes there's a place for that. We need family time. I think as a Christian, I think this is a time that maybe God is using this to help us to learn to slow down and to this fast-paced world and appreciate the things that we need to appreciate. So do that, but also figure out how can we redeem this time? How can we be able to invest the extra time we have in being able to grow and build our organization? And so with that, I feel the problem that I consistently come across with development is that we too often are reactive. We have a need, let's go fund it. Development is done best if we can be proactive in that. And so with that, we need to make sure that we carve out time. I would suggest 1 to 2 hours a day right now, if you can afford that, and investing in our development work. That can be something as picking up the phone and just calling a donor and checking in. It could be writing handwritten notes. It could be texting someone. It could be investing in planning your event. It could be, creating marketing materials. It just needs to be something that we're using this time to stay ahead of it. Let's not procrastinate. Let's not react. But one of the most important times, and honestly, one of the most important things I can give you on this webinar right now is hopefully some encouragement and some kick into action, if you haven't already, invest in your development now. This is an ongoing, proactive process. With that, we've got to trust the process. If you do it really well right now, you probably won't see results in the next 2, even 6 months. You may see some, but you may see those even if you didn't be proactive. However, what does it look like in 12 months, 24 months, 3 years to 5 years? Being proactive now and creating those foundations are building relationships and developing people to your cause, not just creating those transactions. And so that's going to be so crucial for you as you are having that event in 2021 and you need to find some sponsors. Now you've got these relationships you can pull on. You're not trying to grow that from scratch. Or this person that you've developed your relationship these next few months, you can invite them to come to their first event that you've done this fall or 2021, and they can be able to engage and connect with you in a different way because there's already trust that's built versus if they just came in completely cold to who you are and what you're doing. So with that, I'm going to ask another question here. I would love to know, out of the organizations present, do you personally know at least 75% of your donors? So looking at the list of the nonprofits that signed up, I think a lot of you fall under the typical client of ours, which are small donors or small organizations that have maybe 100 to 500 donors. And so I'd love to know how many of you feel like you confidently know personally at least 75% of your donors. A friend of mine with Compassion International, I know, is on this webinar. He's got his own engagement of people that he knows, but obviously he doesn't know 75% of Compassion's donors. So I know there's exceptions to it. But I'd love to know how many of you feel like you know that. And if you can't answer yes, ask yourself, how can I get to know at least 75% of my donors? What are some things that I can do in these next 3 months as we're creating this development plan to engage those people? The reality is, economically, if they can't give right now, they can't give right now. So no matter how creative we get with virtual events and letters and gifts and all this kind of stuff as nonprofits, it's not going to change their capacity to give. But what can change is the relationship and the way that they care and think about you. So when the economic changes and their company starts doing better again, or whatever that looks like, is a lot easier to engage. I'm seeing right now, it looks like 66% are saying no. They do not personally know at least 75% of your donors. So this is hopefully a great time to be able to engage with them, get to know your donors. All right. Sorry about those technical difficulties. I know we lost many of you there with the Webinar Jam website crashing. Always a lot of lessons here as we start a webinar and move into this digital and virtual age. We've looked into other options. I think we're going to use Zoom moving forward, but we wanted to complete this final part of the webinar for our recorded version. So you can access it on our website. You may be watching it there, as well as we're emailing this out. One thing to look forward to as well as we get into this final 15 minutes of the webinar, we're going to talk about some ideas that we have now that you've been able to hopefully process and think through what's the best course of action for your organization and how to make some of these decisions. Now, what type of ideas can we have to solve some of the problems that we may have come up with not being able to have the rest of our events happen for this year? And maybe not this year. Again, I could be wrong on that, but at the very least, for the spring events that you've had to cancel. One thing that we are excited to be able to offer and do is that we're going to create some small group opportunities with nonprofit leaders here in the coming days and weeks ahead as we navigate this. I think one of the best ways as nonprofits that we do in supporting each other is through our community of nonprofit leaders and being able to share creativity and ideas that we have to be able to serve our clients and hopefully for you as a neighboring nonprofit to be able to serve your clients. So with that, the last part of the seminar, we're going to talk about how to proceed in regards to some various ideas that we have. The first idea that I came up with is around the idea of the CARES Act check. As we all know, most Americans are about to get a $1,200 check in the mail. These checks do not discriminate on industry. So those in any industry thriving during this time and therefore working from home and not losing their paycheck may be willing to part ways with their check. So this is really important where although, yes, it is based on tax bracket that those that get the check, it is not going to be based on whether or not that industry is actually suffering during this time. So there's a lot of friends of mine that, you know what, their jobs are secure. They're working from home. Their companies are actually more needed now. And so because of that, they're getting this check in the mail. And their first thought is not, let me pay my groceries or rent like some people are having such a tough time with, but rather, how can I give this away? Who can I support with this? So that's something that is definitely a big need that people, are looking. When crisis happens, you have those that, need help, and you always have those that step up and help. You as a nonprofit leader, you're the kind that steps up and help. There's a lot more out there like you than just maybe in other industries. And so they can help out with this check and be able to make a donation. And in fact, it may be someone who usually can't give a $1,200 gift or a $1,000 gift. Maybe their typical gift is $100 based on, just their other giving as well as their current salary. But since this check is something that they don't necessarily see as their own, they may be more willing to give more, as well as understanding the need and how big it is. With that, I would also suggest if you go this route, move quickly on it. It's a lot easier to get people to commit their gift if they don't see it as their money. So get in front of them before they assign that $1,200 to a specific purchase, but rather really be able to help them before they even get it in the mail or get it directed into their bank account to go ahead and commit and pledge to giving that to you and help them to understand the need and how that $1,200 is going to really impact the work that you guys are doing. So the CARES Act check's the first idea. The second idea is a virtual 5K. So in light of the social distancing and beautiful weather, people are taking full advantage of time, workout, and to get outside. There are ways to have people run a race on their own. Obviously, this is not going to be as official as an official 5K, but I still think people will be attracted and excited about this idea. There's apps out there. You can be able to start the race, run a full 5K, and then as soon as you reach the distance, it stops it. And you can have a leaderboard that's remote. Encourage people, maybe it's the same day, maybe you have a week to be able to run this race. And even though people are separate and doing it, there's still a sense of community with providing this leaderboard. There's competition there, and you can ask people to, a $50, $100 check. Again, maybe it's from that CARES Act, maybe not, to be able to run in this race. Or you can go the model where they can go peer-to-peer fundraising, and they can say, ask 10 of your friends that just got these CARES checks to each give $10. And if you can raise that, that qualifies you for the race, and then have some fun prizes, still award their prizes. This also could be a great way to then actually have a celebration event to be able to attract all those people who run in that race back again this fall or in 2021, when we can get together again in large groups, to be able to have a fun time to celebrate it. And you can have the leaderboard there, and you can reflect on it and laugh upon this time, and just build some good community through this event. But a virtual 5K is another idea. The third option is an online auction. So the same idea with the government relief check. Try to see if you can get some items for an auction that people can purchase at home. People are being hounded with shop local and to do takeout to support their community businesses. So as a concept, they're already being pressured to do. They get to support you. They get something in return. It's not just a gift. And the odds are you're not going to get things donated during this time. So keep that in mind. Like a traditional auction, ideally you get as much as you can donated. That's a great margin when you can get 100% revenue on an item. But businesses are retails, restaurants, those that typically donate, they're really struggling right now. So either one, you can go the consignment route. There's companies out there that have items that are essentially like a wholesale price that you only pay for if the item sells. So there's no risk to you. It's a win-win. They make money. And the idea is that you would at least have the starting bid, at least a 30% markup. And then being an auction, people would bid more. They may be more generous than if they just, go just trying to buy something. And you can get unique items. You can get trips this way. You can get sports memorabilia. Again, I don't love this model for a general traditional auction, but for something in this unique situation, it actually might work really, really well. Another thought would be partner with some local businesses and see if you can buy some of their inventory or gift cards from them at a wholesale price. Again, they probably are sitting full with retail right now, and people aren't going and shopping. So they need to liquidate to continue to pay their employees. So what I would do is go ahead and ask them, could we buy $500 worth of items at your cost, or even a 10% markup. So having a 10% markup, they're actually still making a little revenue right now, and you're still being able to provide items in your auction. One final reason I really like the idea of auctions is I think this is a way that you can get money from people that normally wouldn't just donate. So a friend of a friend, or a family member of a friend that supports you, they may go on, participate in the auction. And this may be something that they typically wouldn't have found you or supported you, but because their friend is there and they have this auction and they see something, or these sports tickets or whatever it looks like that they think their friend would like, they can send it to them, and then they can interact. And if you only get 40% of the total net on that item, that's still better than getting nothing, which you may not have gotten anything from that person if you didn't have this auction. So it could be a really great idea on that front. The fourth idea is to create a social media campaign. So people are engaging social media now more than ever, even before this virus hit. Now with the virus, I'm sure stock on social media just went through the roof with people just using it all the time. And we saw the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, what a huge success that was. I think I remember seeing it raised around like $50 million. And so, I'm not saying you'll raise 50 million out of this, but still get creative. Maybe you can raise 5,000. Maybe it's something that you can raise 1,000 from doing this. But on top of the monetary value, what I love about social media is bringing awareness to your cause. A lot of these ideas are helping you figure out from a financial shortfall that your events not taking place are going to cost you. But the awareness factor is also huge value for an event and a community engagement that you're not going to be able to get now that your event is canceled. So a social media campaign that's specifically tailored to do something fun. I see recently the push-ups idea went around for golfers and those in specific sports. They're saying, post a picture of you playing golf and don't put a caption to it. Things like that are really trendy right now. People are bored. They're sitting at home. And so create a fun, creative idea for people to engage with you, and at the very least raise awareness, if not funds as well, for your cause. So the final idea, if the audience is right for you, is to create a digital event. Just know you got to keep it short. If you're trying to say, let's create an event that's going to be really entertaining and people are going to love, you may be able to do that. I'm a little skeptical though, because I think at the end of the day, Netflix, if they're going to choose between you or a Netflix show, Netflix will probably win. But I do think people still want to know. I think people still want to be able to be in the loop with what's going on with you. They still want to be able to receive information. They still want to hear from friends. They still want to feel like they're part of a community. And so coming together on a live event, you still feel that community engagement. Make it interactive, have it where they can respond with text or on their computer with polls and questions that you can, reveal the results of that in real time. But keep it short. Again, I think a 20-minute event that you can talk about your organization and engage them is a home run. Also, as you do these digital events, don't get up there and give a lecture. Don't make it very data-driven. Share stories. We're made for narratives. So be able to continue to talk about the work that you're doing through stories, through testimonies of clients, and making it in a way that is heartfelt for those that are hearing. Maybe, again, they can't support you right now, but it's still valuable from a development standpoint because you're still keeping that person engaged with your cause. They're knowing about how you're handling the situation, and it can be something that's really attractive with them. Final thing on that is pick the time accordingly based on your demographic. If most of your people are just sitting around during the day, sure, do it during the day. But if you do it at night, you may compete with some primetime television or various things that family activities are having. But if your goal is to reach families, that may be their family activity. So consider the demographic in regards to the time that you do this live event. All right, so that's it. So thank you guys so much for watching this webinar. We're going to do a lot more of these over the coming weeks and months. Stay tuned to emails, our social media. We just got our social medias really going. We've been around for a while, but we haven't invested in our online presence, and no better time than the present to do that. And so follow us on Twitter, follow us on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. You can find all of our links on our website. We would love to be able to keep you engaged. We're going to post blog posts consistently, webinars. We're going to have small groups. You're going to find all this information on our social media stuff. So please keep engage us there. Help us by sharing our posts, like what we have on there. And we would love feedback from you on this video. Please email me. My email is mark@instituteofnet.com. I would love to get your questions. If you have specific questions focused for your organization, let's take a stab at it. Worst case scenario, we give you bad advice and you turn it away. But maybe we'll give you some perspective that you haven't thought of before, both with our expertise and our experience, but also just being an outside party that can look at it from just a different vantage point. And I think there's so much value in community. There's so much value in thinking together. And that's why we want to have these small Zoom calls with small groups of nonprofit leaders to have this think tank type mentality, because now's the time we need to raise up and help each other and being creative with that. So shoot me an email, follow us on social media. Stay tuned to our website for more of these as we continue to build up our resources. And we also have a lot of other friends in the nonprofit space that are doing great content as well that we want to get your way and that we'll share with you as well on all of our platforms. So thank you again for everyone that took the time to watch this. And we hope you guys have a great weekend and a great week.